demonstrate the efficiency of the legal framework which has been designed in the past few years, as we know. Also to have a feedback as to how effective are the legal and institutional systems by the participating countries, and also to identify further necessary interventions to increase the inter-African trade. However, the most important to me was that they were also, this GTI was to test the readiness of the private sector to participate in trade under the Free Trade Initiative. Now, if I remember with Ndademilobi, that's what we tried in an earlier webinar this year, that we felt let's focus strongly on the private sector, the extent to which businesses, through business formations, that begin to roll their sleeves and be more active intensively too in promoting the Free Trade Initiative, because through our interactions and monitoring the Secretary General, we realized that he was going all over the continent, meeting heads of states, ministers of trade, foreign ministers, maybe a business formation, but not much. So that's why we just felt let's ensure that we make that conscious decision. Now the GTI sort of coincided with the efforts that we're doing. And what's striking in any case out of that is that already, although it was triggered in October, that's how much, 3 months ago, there are already a couple of lessons to learn, which one, what was found was that the legal framework, sorry, I'm from Palo, so I usually ensure that I time myself, but particularly that there isn't much time. The trade legal framework of the AfCFTA seems to be ready to support the real trade. And secondly, unfortunately, there are still obstacles on legal or logistical arrangements and capacities, especially for low-scale businesses. I mean, that we know. In Africa, we have that challenge from the AU side for those who are involved. Thirdly, but there was also a discovery that there's a need to promote private sector involvement through, let's mark this word, dedicated, intensive awareness programs. That's exactly what we were doing, as I said, with Ndademilobi from last year, essentially. There's also a need for creative and tailored solutions to trade and finance and transport challenges. The appetite for African products has also already shown positive signals. Remember, it's only 3 months. And the last one, not being an expert, but it struck me that there's a need for trade aggregation, which once again points figures at business formations that they should really coordinate so that the economies of scales can be leveraged. Something striking as well I came up as I was checking what is it that I can share, that during the AU Extraordinary Summit in Niger last month, there was a workshop with the International Trade Center, one of these UN agencies, with the AfCFTA. Primarily, the focus was to ensure that the private sector is updated on the status of negotiations in order to help business to prepare for the, let's say, further implementation or intensive implementation. It's no longer just implementation of the AfCFTA. So you can see now, if I say the journey, of the knocking at doors, asking for support, mobilizing support, ever since the GTI, it's becoming clear that now we're tasting the pudding. We're checking into when we start trading under the banner of AfCFTA, what happens, and also this mapping that was done at the last month at the Extraordinary Summit also, bears testimony to that. However, one other context is that, lest we forget, we should ensure synergies between the AfCFTA and BRICS. South Africa is part of BRICS. Of one thing with authority, it never participates as merely South African. It pulls the whole of the continent with it. Hence, I'm saying the synergies between the free trade and BRICS are very, very essential. And I hope one of the key note speakers would really highlight and go to town on that. If there was a slide, I was just going to round up by just saying that, all the stats that we know we found in the website, we get shared in presentations. I was just saying that, look, hopefully, amongst other things, this is one of the things we are going to look at and ensure that they get improved. We talk of a combined GDP of the continent of $2.4 trillion, that there'll be an income of $450 billion income by 2035, and getting 30 billion people out of poverty, and a couple of other things. But also, primarily, what always draw me into me, even with my previous life, is the fact that the intra-African trade is 18% compared to more than 60% in Asia and Europe. I don't know any other continent that has more than 60%, but I'm sure these two, Asia and Europe, they've got more. And if we're at 18%, it means we've got to roll our sleeves. We've got a lot of work ahead. And our contribution to global trade is a mere 2%. Of course, we're not going to rush to increase that fee. We're going to rush to ensure intra-African trade, which means by consequence, there'll be an increase in our contribution on that as well. Well, that program director, I hope I've done. I can just close by saying that, as far as I'm concerned, the journey our journey now is beyond expression of support. Secretary General Mene has done enough going throughout, crisscrossing the continent. The focus is not just on implementation, but it's on real implementation. And the GTI is a very strong and undoubted testimony to that. Asante Sane, Medasi, Shukran, Siyabonga.
Thank you very much, Babusia, for open remarks, which have set the scene in terms of contextualizing the conversation that will ensue from now. Without any waste of time, I'm being duly informed that we're joined by High Commissioner of the Republic of Cameroon, His Excellency Anugele Solomon Azol Mbi in our midst. Commissioner, you are most welcome. You've just started. Thank you very much. Without any waste of time, I will also now call upon the next speaker, whom I've had the privilege of talking to, but this is her platform. Dr. Amni Asfo is the president of Africa Business Council. She's a medical doctor and entrepreneur who has contributed immensely to the empowerment of women in business during her career. She's also the president of Egyptian Business Women Association, the young enterprise sector. She's also a graduate. She graduated from Cairo University Faculty of Medicine with master's degree and MD in paramedics. She joined the private sector while she was still a student, establishing a medical equipment company. She's also a lecturer in pediatrics in the National Research Center in Egypt, which is an active organization in Africa, Asia, and Europe. On that brief encounter, I welcome you, Dr. Amni. Please proceed. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. His Excellency Andre Nazarbaiki, Ambassador of Central African Republic and Dean of the African Diplomatic Corps, Mr. Kibert Kobi, Executive Chairman, Africa Tourism Board, Mr. Ben Laika, CEO of the African Agri Council and CEO of TRC Investor, Mr. Alan Mukoko, CEO of South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Ambassador Muhammad Famusu Dini, Paul Mukona, Partner Foundation, Nathan Marimusu, founder of the Empire Partner Foundation, Mr. Mikhail Marimusu, manager of the Empire Partner Foundation, Saul Moloko, convener of the conference and CEO of the Brandhill Africa, Cesar Nicolina, co-convener and managing director of Third Coast Consulting, brothers and sisters, all protocols observed. So thank you very much for inviting me for this very, very important conference, which really speaks to the flagship program of our African continent. It speaks actually for the dream of all of us to see how the AfCFTA, after 2 years operationalization, what does it have an impact on the daily life of our people? How does this AfCFTA that all of us are waiting increase the intra-Africa trade, which is currently 16%? How can we increase it? What does it have to do? What are the pillars for engagement with the private sector? And that's why today, as President of Africa Business Council, it's my real pleasure to be with you, because Africa Business Council is established in line with the Heads of State Decision Summit to be the premier voice of the private sector of the continent and to be the advocacy platform for legislation for empowering the African private sector, to unite the voices of African private sector, but moreover it is established within the architecture of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So our founding vision of the Africa Business Council is a competitive, borderless, innovative Africa for trade, investment and industrialization. And having said that, why? Because if we want to really do trade, are we going to do trade among ourselves and bring containers from China or India or Dubai? Or we want to have trade with a made in Africa product that is industrialized within the continent. So this is actually the main core of the AfCFTA. How can the AfCFTA be the vehicle of our economic growth, be the vehicle of our wealth, and make sure that everybody is involved and everybody is aware about the AfCFTA. So in pursuing this, actually, the African Business Council, we have a strategy. I call it the triad of empowerment. And this triad of empowerment really includes 3 pillars. The first pillar is about private sector strengthening, including SMEs, women and youth. Because if you want to realize the AfCFTA, we need to have an African sector which is powerful. And our African private sector actually across the continent includes 90% of small and medium enterprises. Of course, also including women and youth. So in order to empower our African private sector, we need to see how we can make awareness, like my brother, formation for the private sector and training of the private sector to see how can we really realize the AfCFTA and know more about the AfCFTA sector and sector strategy. The second P or second pillar is policy advocacy. If we're talking about the private sector and what we need really, we need the policies that would empower this private sector. We need the governments, the parliamentarians, the legislation would have laws that would favor incentives for the investment in the continent. If we want to talk about AfCFTA, we want to talk about products, we need to have investment. This investment, how can we promote investment and also investment from the continent to bring get his money procedures. Another one policy that we as Africa Council is advocating for is to have, it goes to African private sector and African product. Till when is the government's tenders and the government services and purchases goes to big multinational companies? So this is one thing that we are advocating for as African Business Council, to see how what is present on the African soil cannot be brought from outside the African soil. So if we do this, if we have a 40% of all government procurement goes to African private sector, including SMEs, women and youth, with African products, then we really don't have this. African private sector doesn't have to compete with multinational companies, with big companies coming from outside the continent. So in doing this, we need to have a mapping exercise of what is existing on the continent, because a lot of things really is about information. We don't know about each other. There is no connection between the business linkages. There is not much information about what is present on the continent, what is manufactured on the continent. So this is one of the things that we are assuming to do as African Business Council, to set up this mapping exercise of what is existing on the continent. So when when a government wants to put a tender, it will be open for all our African companies, African expertise, to make sure that we are aware of what is needed on the continent and what is present on the continent. Another policy that we are advocating for is about financial inclusion. And financial inclusion, many of us have been talking about it, but until now, our African private sector have no full access to the financing. The SMEs have no full access to see if they want to get a loan. All the private sector across the continent really should be financially included. And not only that, but we need also to be financially linked. We need to see how among ourselves, the payment systems among ourselves, how can a rural woman in one of any of the countries can be financially included, how she can also make trade between any country and the other country without impediments. So this is also financial inclusion. And all the policies that really favors the African private sector, but also will put rules and regulations for investment on the major issue with reference to register, like pharmaceuticals. We want to register one drug in one country and make that is manufactured on the country, something registered in one country, then it could be registered in the 55 countries under the umbrella of African Union. So this is also one of the policies that we are really seeing how we have this harmonization. Like the third pillar, the third P, my dear brothers and sisters, it's about product development. What do we have on the continent as products? Are we still going to export our raw materials as always, or we add value to our product? And to have a real product which is branded, designed, packaged, value added, standardized, quality. This is the Africa product. This is what we need as a made in Africa product. To be competitive, to be quality, to be value added. We see a lot of our natural resources in the continent, and all of us know that we are already exporting our natural resources without value addition, without this. It's about one single market, how this one single market trade among ourselves with a made in Africa product. Because as long as we want to have legislation to have procurement for made in Africa products, we need to have this how we promote industrialization, how we make incentives for industrialization. And His Excellency, the President of Niger, Bazoum, he mentioned that in Niger they have a lot of cattle and a lot of milk, but they are still getting and importing dairy products from outside the country. They are still importing milk from outside the country. So how can a resource, natural resources, be present in a country and yet, and our continent is full